Oh. Good morning, thank you very much. May I begin by paying respect to the elders, both past and present, of this beautiful country. My name's John Davidson. Thank you for getting up early this morning to come and see me and hear this presentation about the economics of different power options for Australian mining companies. This disclaimer means that basically anything that I say, please don't base that on any investment decisions without seeking external advice. So Carnegie Clean Energy, that's ASX ticker CCE. We employ more than 100 people. That's all we do is clean energy. We're very active in developing world-leading wave technology and have installed a couple of demonstration sites and are building more of those in Cornwall and Albany. That's been, and it's worth noting and thanking the support that we've had there from ARENA and the CFC through that process. It's been very instrumental. Of course, wave power isn't going to have much of a solution for you guys out in the middle of the desert, we know that. Typically, the 100 megawatt scale wave farm that we're looking to build will end up in the European shores. So EMC, the 100% owned subsidiary, was acquired at the end of last year. EMC's been around for more than a decade and its focus has been on microgrids, solar and PV, batteries, wind integration and so on. Our focus is clearly wave energy, microgrids, and we also have an appetite and are building, owning and operating our own projects. So we say we've been at the forefront. More than a decade ago there wasn't much of a forefront in this industry, to be completely open and frank. Our roots date back as far as 1987 when we wrote a research paper for the federal government that surprisingly was called How to Deploy Large-Scale Solar PV and Batteries into Remote Australia. That report, we still have it, was written with a golf ball typewriter, which was pretty high-tech back then, I have to tell you. So we've been in the red dirt for more than 2 decades now. A lot of our original projects are around cattle stations who don't have any alternative other than diesel generators. When the RRPGP program came along and was providing 50% funding for those projects, that created a micro market that came to an end about 4 or 5 years ago. We integrate world's best technologies from the large manufacturers of batteries, inverters. We choose best of kind. There's no one silver bullet in this market, and the solutions aren't off the shelf. They're very much engineered to suit load curves and all of the other things that make every mine site different to the next. So we heard a massive transformation happening in the energy market. That number there is pretty impressive. Potential for the global microgrid market being estimated at $40 billion per annum by 2020. This is even catching us by surprise, the speed at which this market is building, the speed at which the cost of the enabling equipment is coming down is catching us by storm as well. The curve that batteries is on at the moment is very similar to the curve that we saw with PV. Energy density is improving in those batteries. As recently as 12 months ago, we could fit 1.2 megawatt hours into a 40-foot container. Today, we're sort of 2.1 megawatt hours. So that energy density, that cost is happening. The roadmaps of these lithium-ion battery manufacturers showing their pricing roadmap is indicating substantial reduction in cost. Of course, that opens up and brings down that LCOE and makes things bankable. Ivor's comment yesterday I thought was a beauty when he said, this is Ivor Frischene from ARENA, I'm not sure if he's here, when he said it's got to the point now where the risk is to not do anything. I thought that was quite fitting. At a couple of these national conferences over the years, we've heard a few milestone statements. Another one only a year ago at the Clean Energy Council Week in Sydney. The opening remarks said that it was now cheaper to build a solar power station than it was a coal-fired power station. So these breakthroughs heading towards that grid parity that all form part of the subject of the economics of renewables into the mining sector. So there were some great speakers yesterday, and thank you to all of those on behalf of everybody. A lot of what I had planned to talk about had already been covered off. We've all seen the declining cost of PV. We've seen the LCOEs. So I thought I'd just take you through some of the non-mining type projects that we've been building here in WA, here in Australia, based on the options here. As you see, the generator stuck out in the middle of the desert and a 44-gallon drum next to it, all poles and wires. Of course, there are other options in there as well. For example, hydro or whatever else happened to be around. But typically at the moment, if you want to do something in the middle of the desert, it's either poles or wires or a diesel generator. So the alternatives, and again, there are other alternatives here. There's wind and there's flow batteries and there's other battery technologies. But if we're talking a hardcore deliverable bankable solution that can be slid across a boardroom table and a board go, yes, we will take those warranties and we'll take those guarantees from a Sumitomo or a Samsung or a very large company who can back those long-term warranties, 10, 15 years on batteries and 25 years on PV. So what can it power? What have we been powering with that combination of lithium and solar? Of recent times, we've done 3 or 4 defence bases. We're building a wave-integrated microgrid down at Garden Island with 5 megawatts of PV, a couple of megawatt hours of battery, a provision to connect wave, grid tied and standalone all in one. So it can go off the grid, it can go back on the grid, give them time to start their big generators down there if the one feeder that goes across the causeway to the base happens to be damaged. Agricultural sector is a booming market in Australia at the moment. The northwest, the Kimberley area, the cattle, the food bowl, water pumping, energy for the musterers and the cowboys, all of that is a big market. Remote communities for the Indigenous communities is a very complex market, but they're all pretty much reliant on 100% diesel right now, with bankability on replacing that with a microgrid of 4 to 5 years. The resource sector, of course, and that's why we're here today, and astronomy, which is a bit of a rare egg. That's the CSIRO project that I'll show you a bit more about in a minute. But of course, the resource sector, if I can just touch on that quickly, it's a tough game. Let's not be afraid to say how hard it is to be a miner in the middle of the desert, always remote, harsh temperatures, harsh environments. It's not easy to do what you guys do, and that's produce world-class resources out of the Australian resource sector. You've got enough going on to be worried about trying to innovate and be first of class, first of kind with some newfangled, dangled solar panel thingy that may or may not work. And over the decades we've heard, but it won't start my crushers and it will do this. And we've heard it all. There's lots of barriers to crack this market. And that Ivor statement yesterday, I think, was a cracker. I'll use that again and again. But I guess the point there is there is bankability for renewables in that resource sector. There's no doubt about that. And I guess it's finding the right independent engineering partner, and I'm not talking about us at the moment, I'm talking about everybody else, who can help you navigate through those pathways of doing proper studies, proper evaluation of your load curves and how the system is going to integrate. The other thing about mining, of course, is the issue of greenfield versus brownfields. We've been longing for decades to find a mine who would be prepared to build in automated load levelling, load shedding, all tied into a control system that was managing the input of PV, the input of diesel and the storage of that energy in batteries. And of course that's been very hard. When you guys have got a deadline, you want to start shipping ore on the 27th of November and you've told your shareholders that, you've got to do that. You don't really have time to muck around and try and investigate and do those other things. There are a couple of greenfield sites that we're working with at the moment. You may have heard Monsieur Paul Volant from TNG yesterday, who are developing a vanadium mine in the Northern Territory. They're wanting to be able to install a vanadium flow battery on that mine to be able to demonstrate application for their electrolyte that can be made out of the vanadium that they're going to be mining. And they're now having a look from the greenfield up as to how they can manage their energy and do things a little bit differently. The other really good thing in our market here in WA at the moment is there's a lot of smaller mines popping up everywhere. We're seeing lithium mines, some big ones, lots of smaller innovative mines that are really quite prepared to have a look at that greenfield type application. I think that's a really good opportunity for the industry to try and get behind those guys and help them navigate through that pathway of building something from the ground up. So this chart here, I guess the big takeaway here is the trending that you see of grid only and diesel. That's out to 2050, I think that number says. It's showing that if you're tied to the grid, your power prices are just going to keep going up. If you're tied to diesel, your power prices are going to keep going up over the life of the mine, and that the other options, wind, gas, PV, are all coming down over that period of time. So embedding your life modelling of that mine with a declining energy cost or a fixed energy cost may make some projects that are marginally bankable over their life. So these are a few projects that we've just completed recently. This is a convoy of batteries. That's 2.6 megawatt hours of batteries on its way to the world's largest radio telescope, the Square Kilometre Array project that's being built by the CSIRO in the middle of the Murchison. That's 765 kilometres northeast of here, in the middle of nowhere, literally. Those containers have all been built out at our facility in Belmont and all commissioned, all factory tested there in Belmont, disconnected, put on the truck, taken to site, reconnected. One of the interesting challenges of this job was that the customer required radio frequency silence, so all of those containers had to be built, converted into a full Faraday cage with amazing amount of development and detail that had to go into that, working with the CSIRO. So that's 1.6 megawatts of PV. It's a HV 6.6 kV connection, ABB PCS 100 inverter, and all commissioned and operating now. There's another shot of it with the PV in the background. This is about 3.5 years old. This island installation, it's a Chevron Island. They decommissioned their refinery on that island as part of the Wheatstone project and left the island without any energy. And we were asked to build a standalone power system there, which we have done. It's been operating now for 21,942 hours, and the diesel generator runtime is less than 1,000 hours. So we talked yesterday, I heard people talking about penetration and all of this sort of stuff. Well, this is 98% solar powered island, 2.5 years operating, no outages. Payback period, very important for this island. Of course, fuel costs were quite high out there, which helped our model, but they were spending $500,000 a year on fuel. Today they're spending very little, if none, and the payback there is 3.5 to 4.5 years, with equipment that's guaranteed for 25 and batteries that are guaranteed for 10. This is a project we're developing. We have an appetite to build, own and operate infrastructure. We'll do that on mines, we'll do that for Indigenous communities, we'll do that wherever. This will be a grid-connected system. We've just had approval from the council to be able to develop that project, and we hope to have that completed by December. Alchemist was another ARENA-funded project. The customer was Synergy. Synergy's the West Australian Government's energy retailer, and they were wanting to demonstrate how potentially a community-style battery may have an application compared to people putting batteries in their linen closets. And this is a 1.1 megawatt hour battery, again factory tested, taken to site, plugged in, and it's been operating successfully now for over a year. It's taking power off people's roofs during the day when they're not at work and selling it back to them at night on a special tariff that Synergy have set up. Now, this is first of class, first of kind, and that R&D program on how that how the levers, the economic levers of that work out is still rolling. Down in our southwest, in our wheat fields, a year and a half ago we had some massive bushfires and we tragically lost life and property. And the power utility, Horizon Power, lost a lot of poles and wires. And they found very quickly that it was going to be more economical to install a mini microgrid, a standalone power system, instead of replacing those poles and wires. Economics there are, if there's more than 4 poles, it's cheaper to put in a standalone power system today, and that will come down. And we're talking about poles and wires that run for as far as the eye can see. So there's hundreds of these sites that where those ageing poles and wires can effectively be replaced with the same technology that you, the mining companies, are considering deploying into your mine sites now. Power quality down there is far greater than what it was before because we now no longer have the long skinny poles and wires delivering the energy. The energy is delivered right there and the outages have been far less frequent. I mentioned earlier this Defence Department project down at Garden Island. This is integrating with ARENA funding again, may I add. Thank you, ARENA. And it's to build a PV station with a big battery and a grid tie, grid disconnect microgrid, which has all the complexities of dealing with both the Western Power grid and stabilising the grid while the generators come on at that defence base. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for listening to me.